The opinions expressed on this program represent the viewpoints of individual authors or contributors and do not necessarily reflect those of Troy University.
Welcome to International Insights. I am Doug Davis, and with me is Michael Slobodchikoff. On this episode, we'll be speaking with Mr. Tomohiko Taniguchi. Dr. Taniguchi has a long and distinguished career in business journalism and has worked in London. He served as the president at the Foreign Press Association in London and has spent sabbaticals at Princeton University, the Shanghai Institute for International Studies, and the Brookings Institutions. He joined the Ministry of Foreign Affairs as Deputy Press Secretary and as a Deputy Director General for Public Diplomacy. He worked very closely with Prime Minister Abe Shinzo while he was in office in the areas of strategic communication. Dr. Taniguchi, welcome from Japan.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me.
Dr. Taniguchi, I'd love to ask you, to start off, you worked very closely with former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. What was he like as a person, and what lessons did you learn from him?
Thank you very much. He was shot dead on the 8th of July last year. I was working at home, right in the middle of completing a chapter of a book which was precisely about his foreign policy speeches that I worked to draft. And my wife upstairs screamed, "Abe got shot. He lost his vital." Just, I could not believe it. And since that time, for some time, I would say until very much recently, I was in a strange mood, if you like. It was almost as if I accidentally entered another strange world. And there must be a real world in which Shinzo Abe would still be alive and kicking. And it is funny because being a speechwriter, you must always think about what your client, in this case Prime Minister Abe, is thinking about, because you must synchronize everything you have with that individual, Shinzo Abe. It sometimes occurs to me, even today, whenever I see cheerful, whenever I see something cheerful, whenever I see something encouraging, for instance, about the great performance of young athletes, Japanese young athletes, the next moment I'm thinking of, wow, this is so great, I've got to tell Shinzo Abe and see what he would have to say. So it's a vocational disease which I cannot wipe away. Shinzo Abe hardly drank alcoholic beverages because he developed ulcerative colitis, a difficult disease which is basically incurable, at the age of 15. And until the age of 58, this chronic illness went on and off. It went on and went off, and it came back, and it continued to haunt him. But at the age of 58, a new drug was introduced in the Japanese market, and he started to use that. And for the first time in his adult life, Imagine, for the first time in his adult life at the age of 58, he developed confidence in his health. And with that confidence, he developed his mind, he developed his determination to aim at seeking the highest office of Japanese politics once again. Why once again? Because he was in the highest office, Prime Minister's office, as Prime Minister between 2006 and 7, but only for a year. And until he has just passed a year, he had to step down because of that chronic illness. When he came back as Prime Minister, December 2012, he was a different person. I sometimes called him a second born politician. Born again, well, not in the religious sense of the term, but in the physical sense of the word, that really made sense. He was a different person. And so he was determined to take risks. He was determined to pay as little attention to the zigging and zagging of poll ratings. And he was determined to do as much, which brought actually him to circle the globe, I don't know, 40 times, visiting 100 and even more countries and making friends both with Barack Obama and strikingly and Donald J. Trump. I think he was the only leader among G7 nations that developed very good rapport with both of those starkly different US presidents. And if you look at where Japan is, you can't envy Japan's neighborhood because around Japan you've got Russia, North Korea, China, none of which has ever exercised anything akin to open democracy, and every one of which is busy developing nuclear arsenal. With that in mind, Shinzo Abe wanted to reduce tension in the north of Japan by forging the peace treaty, finally, between Russia and Japan. There has been no peace treaty since the end of the Second World War. So he met Vladimir Putin as many times as 28 times, unfortunately to little avail. Shinzo Abe was a different person, but in private, you had 100% psychological safety working with him because he never raises his voice. He never loses his temper. He changes very little to one individual to another, regardless of how important or how not important the person that Shinzo Abe is speaking to. And his childhood friends have continued as friends until his demise. Well, I can speak like this for hours, but I'll just stop here.
Excellent. Prime Minister Abe was able to work with many different people in governments and had, as you said, very good relationships with both Obama and Trump. How was he able to create good relations with such different personalities?
Right. It applies certainly to the case of the United States, but from India, we had two equally different characters. One Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, who is now in office, and his predecessor, Manmohan Singh, who was like a college professor of economics. And Narendra Modi is a self-made person. So these two are very much different. But Shinzo Abe was able to build strong bonds with these two people. Part of that reason is his pragmatism. He knows that India is important, but he knows even more that the United States is the most important country for Japan. Needless to say, the US Japan alliance has continued since the 1950s. That's the longest alliance partnership the United States has ever had in its history. And for Japan, without that alliance, you could perhaps think nothing of protecting yourself and protecting the region. And in exchange, Japan has been willing to host the biggest military footprint of the United States. So among military families, you have a huge number of people that say that they have lived in Japan. So it is incumbent upon any prime minister, be it Abe or whoever else, that leads Japan to continue to maintain the best possible relationship with the United States president. One time, a prominent investor, whose name I dare not say, but very much a famous one, philanthropist as well, came to his office and urged Shinzo Abe to be careful about bringing Abe so close to Donald Trump. To which Shinzo Abe responded, I know that's what you say, but as Prime Minister of Japan, I must be very much careful about how best to preserve Japan's own national interest. And Japan's national interest would not be safeguarded without maintaining a very good relationship with someone who just happens to be in the highest office of the United States. Um, so that's number one. Number two, the strong relationship with Bibi Netanyahu and Shinzo Abe was also well known. And Bibi Netanyahu himself is a very much controversial political leader. He may be. However, Shinzo Abe did not meet Bibi Netanyahu with headlines of major newspapers in mind. He wanted to see Bibi Netanyahu's eyes like this, right? And then get emotions, try to get emotions and feelings directly from the individual he was talking to. And so that might have been a little bit different from other Japanese prime ministers who tended to look robotic, if you like, plastic and faceless. But Shinzo Abe was very much different. So the outpouring of empathy, sympathy when he lost his life was enormous. Xi Jinping, the most difficult political, let's say, counterpart for Shinzo Abe, even Xi Jinping sent a heartwarming letter himself to Mrs. Abe. And the same went with Vladimir Putin. So he was Shinzo Abe's ability to build strong relationships, individual relationships, was something very much unique.
Thank you. Former Prime Minister Abe believes that China was a real threat to Asia's stability. How did he go about trying to balance China's power in Asia?
Whenever Shinzo Abe met Xi Jinping, he did not fail to mention that Xi Jinping never ever should underestimate the resolve of the Japanese people to protect the territorial integrity. It is a daily phenomenon that Chinese official institutions like Coast Guard or Fishery Agency send patrol boats and official boats, and in a very much coercive manner provoke the territorial integrity of Japan and, for that matter, Vietnam, the Philippines, and so on and so forth. I think it was something like what Ronald Reagan all the time said: peace through strength. So, in order for Shinzo Abe to maintain Japan's resolve and show that resolve to Xi, he knew that first and foremost, Japan must become a successful economy once again. So his economic agenda was inseparable from his strategic initiatives. So that's number one. And he knows that you cannot ruin Chinese-Japanese relationship, which poses a unique dilemma for countries such as Japan, or for that matter, Australia. These two countries have been dependent on the trade with China. By the way, the United States and Japan are statistically outliers here, because the US depends on external trade by a percentage point as opposed to GDP, something like 2%. And Japan's case is similar. German trade dependency ratio is much higher than 25% or something like that. But Japan can do well without so much relying upon any single country for trade. That said, it's still a case. Toyota, Nissan, Honda, you name it, those house brand companies do a lot of businesses in terms of manufacturing, in terms of sales in China. And so the number of expatriate community, the expatriates and their family members is huge. Assuming that there was a war between China and Taiwan and Japan got involved, I think it's going to be impossible for Japan to come to rescue those Japanese individuals working in Shanghai, Beijing, and so on. So it's a subtle, very much subtle balance you always have to strike. And once again, in order for you to strike a better balance, you need to be strong. And how can you be strong? Without building robust economic foundations, you cannot be strong. And Japan, unlike what it was in the 1980s, has gone through a prolonged period of economic malaise. And under Shinzo Abe, it started to go up again, but there is another challenge domestically. You've got a huge growing population of the senior citizens, and with the growing number of senior citizens, it's very much important for you to acquire something new, for you to take risks, and so on and so forth. So it's a dual challenge, but without facing up to these challenges, you cannot build a strong foundation when it comes to coping with the challenge of China, or for that matter, Russia, and so on.
Excellent, excellent. You wrote many foreign policy speeches for former Prime Minister Abe. Which speeches do you think were the most important, and why?
Thank you. If I may say, those would be actually two speeches. One, obviously, was the one that Prime Minister Abe delivered to the joint session of the US Congress, April 2015. And another is the one that he delivered in 2007 when he was Prime Minister for the first time at the joint House of the Indian Parliament. These two were the most important speeches that he would say if he were alive. First, the speech that he delivered to the joint session of the US Congress was so designed as to give new impetus to the US Japan alliance by calling the alliance an alliance of hope. The US Japan alliance worked tremendously well during the Cold War era, without which Japan could not have sustained itself, facing up to challenges from the communist regimes of China and Russia. But thanks to the, frankly speaking, blood, and tears, sweat and tears, the U.S. young men and women shed in Korea and in Vietnam, Japan's post-war growth was made possible. So he wanted to thank the Americans for that, and then he wanted to lead the audience, that is to say, members of Congress, to think forward about the value we must preserve in maintaining the US Japan alliance going forward. So it was to give new life to the alliance from the one that worked under the Cold War circumstances to the one that should work for many, many decades to come in this challenging neighborhood where you get Russia, North Korea, China, and so on. So that was the aim that he had for the speech that he delivered at the US Congress. Now, the Indian one was named Confluence of Two Seas, mingling together of two seas. Confluence of Two Seas just happened to be a title of a book of the Mughal prince. So it's one of the classic works of Indian literature. But if you think about confluence of two seas, you can just imagine, you can just envision the new geostrategic concept. It is simply about the Indo-Pacific. Prior to that, the word Indo-Pacific did exist, but it did not have much geostrategic connotation in it. Since that speech, Indians started to speak much, much more about Indo-Pacific. Australians followed suit. And actually, Trump and Obama and Trump folks also started to use Indo-Pacific. So I should maintain that the speech that he delivered to the Indian Parliament in August 2007 under the title of The Confluence of Two Seas became a genesis for the geostrategic and geoeconomic concept of the Indo-Pacific. So those two speeches, I would say, were the ones that were very much important for him.
Thank you. Speaking about speeches, and you being a speechwriter, what do you think makes for an effective speechwriter, and how did your experience working in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs prepare you for working with former Prime Minister Abe?
Thank you very much. You must be a short sleeper. You must endure a lot of sleepless speeches. It takes about a month to get one speech prepared. So in the case of the speech that I mentioned, that he delivered to the U.S. Congress, was actually the 19th revised version. The final product was the 19th revised version, meaning within a short period of 1 month, I had to spend 19 sleepless nights. I started off as a journalist, and I was a magazine man. for a magazine, you have a prolonged deadline, actually, unlike a newspaper, 2 days or 3 days, and you must rewrite and rewrite and rewrite, and in the meantime, you must sleep very short hours, and that actually gave me the foundation, if you like. And Minister of Foreign Affairs was the same. Foreign Minister, Prime Minister, some of the busiest people, they are your clients, and so you cannot say, please give me 2 days, 3 days for revision. So I would say you must be a short sleeper, and you must maintain your demeanor. You must maintain your calmness, no matter how stupid an idea bureaucrats would throw at you. You must absorb those opinions anyhow, because you must develop a sense of unity among members of the government, because it's a governmental affair. It's not a private speech. It's an official speech.
Excellent. We're in our final minute of the broadcast, and I want to ask you, what are the main lessons that you learned through your time serving government and Prime Minister Abe? What are the things that you want people who are able to watch this to take away and remember?
Well, I've been very much extremely lucky being able to serve the longest continued prime ministership under Prime Minister Abe. He was the longest serving prime minister. And you need to have a long serving leader, because challenges you have, be it in the United States or anywhere else, take long time commitment. And as I worked for a prolonged period of time, I was able to develop prime ministerial viewpoint, which does not distinguish politics from economics, military from economics, education from economics. You have to look at in a holistic way. And that's something that I was able to develop myself. And I could not have had anything like that being a journalist. Being a journalist is itself an important task, but I was able to develop a holistic view, just as my boss, Shinzo Abe, developed himself.
Thank you very much. We're unfortunately out of time. I want to thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us, and it was truly an honor for us. And I know that I learned a tremendous amount about you and also former Prime Minister Abe. Thank you.
Thank you very much.